ADHD. What can I say? ADHD isn't like necessarily an uncommon thing, but I think ADHD in adults is, quite uncommon. More particularly getting diagnosed with ADHD as an adult, and that's because ADHD is not something that can manifest over time. It's something that affects you your whole life. But when I say it affects you, like the ramifications of that, they're pretty significant. They can affect the way you perform in school. They can affect the way you perform at work. They can have like adverse effects on your relationships. All sorts of things that, whether you're a child, an adult, or an old man, because we're going to differentiate that for some reason, just for vibes. ADHD can have real world effects on the way you handle yourself and the way things kind of affect you. So yeah, let's get into what it was like for me getting diagnosed with ADHD, inattentive type. Let me put that out there from the beginning. As a 24-year-old adult. So I want to start by talking about some very, very quick fire points that don't necessarily make sense in the story or the narrative of the video, but I want to get them off my chest anyways. I think they're kind of interesting or relevant. So I mentioned that I'm the inattentive type. ADHD is hyperactive attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There you go. You got there in the end. So when you think of hyperactive, you think of someone who's fidgety, someone who's getting around a lot. They kind of cut you off when you're talking. They jump in and finish your sentences for you. Kind of agitated, jump into the front of queues. There are a lot of different symptoms to it. I'm by no means a psychiatrist. But obviously going through the process, I've kind of picked up things here and there. And then being inattentive is more the concentration, the memory, the being disorganized, missing deadlines. You can have one or the other, or even the combined ADHD in its entirety. So there are, I guess, 3 different real types, proper observable types, I should say, of ADHD. I haven't done too much of the reading into ADD. That just means attention deficit disorder. So I guess that's technically the inattentive type of ADHD. If I think about it, I haven't actually done the research yet. Maybe I should have before making this video, but it's Monday night. Well, in fact, it's Tuesday morning, so I'm a bit late on this video, but shout out to me. Also, I think one of the reasons why I even started to pursue ADHD in adults myself, or why I eventually got diagnosed, because I heard a podcast that kind of talked about ADHD in women, ADHD in girls, and why it's over diagnosed in men, and what sort of traits we kind of associate with ADHD. It was quite a cool discussion about OCD, the way it's perceived in movies and shows versus what it's actually living with OCD, and it's more mental disorder, mental health difficulties at large. And I thought it was interesting talking about women, and how young girls are someone who might be more inattentive, kind of doodling on paper, looking out the window, daydreaming. And these things aren't necessarily picked up on as ADHD because there are boys in the class who are throwing balls everywhere, and the whole class clown, persona and jumping around. The hyperactive stuff is way easier to characterize and to observe, whereas someone who's not paying attention, always a couple of minutes late for class. I think in school it's different because it's quite organized. You get in at a certain time, there's bells everywhere, you follow your friend to the next lesson, so it's quite easy to stay on top of things. But things like homework maybe might slip through the ranks, or getting to school in the first place, going home in the first place versus lunch break and stuff. So it's harder to observe, and I kind of thought a lot of these things that they're talking about that are observable in women, huh? What's going on here? Am I inattentive? And I eventually pursued the diagnosis, of which we're going to go into the story of that now. So again, let's talk about my experience. I mentioned the podcast, but there was also I kind of always knew that I kind of always struggled with things, or felt like there was something different about me, but I never really perceived it as ADHD. I never perceived it as an issue, because I think in society we have this kind of, I don't know, it's not like a capitalism thing. I don't want to put a title on it or a label on it, but if you're productive, or if you're functional, you're not really seen as having an issue. The whole word of being disabled implies that you're less able to do things, or you physically can't do things. If you're in a wheelchair, going upstairs is obviously going to be quite challenging. But being a bit less focused, or being chronically late, you can still kind of get by for the most part. I mentioned in school, if you're just following your friends to the next class anyways, you're not really having that real problem. It's not really perceivable. It's only when you go to university or go to the workplace, and you start to see these things manifesting in different ways, where again, chronically late, disorganized. You're someone like myself. If you're a long-term follower of the channel, you know that I've ended up failing my first year, failed second year. Funnily enough, ended up failing third year, which we'll get into in another video. But I know I'm capable of doing things. When it comes to exams, I always seem to perform quite well. It's more like the coursework, the keeping up to date with this, and the independent study, and all this stuff that just doesn't work well. And no matter what I do, I've got a journal somewhere here. It's in my bag. No matter how much time I spend doing to-do lists or calendars or trying to stay organized, none of these tasks, none of these tips that work for regular people seem to work for me. I've got 4 calendars in my room. One that's like a monthly one like an annual one, a weekly one. Doesn't help. I'm not going to go into the depths of everything that I put on my referral form, because that would be kind of long and jarring for you guys. But I think you can kind of skip over the necessity for that by knowing that I've obviously been diagnosed. So a psychiatrist has reviewed that and thought, yeah, this guy's pretty messed up. But I guess what I think is most interesting is that I have friends who have ADHD, I have friends who have ADD, dyslexia, my family with dyslexia and other types of mental health difficulties, or just mental disorders at large. And I've always kind of resonated with what they do, what they say. They might explain something to me, and I'm like, that's literally what I'm thinking. But I'm not, I'm not dysfunctional. So I don't know, maybe I don't have it. But eventually, once you get all this data, someone says, are you sure you don't have it? People who do have it, you seem to have things in common with. You hear this podcast says this. Eventually, it's like, what? Let me just get it checked. I think what's important about this video as well is we talk about how it's difficult as an adult to be diagnosed with ADHD. And once you realize that, for me, granted I'm in university and still technically, of adult age, being in an educational institution kind of gives me the luxuries of having the disability services, the wellbeing services, all these kind of departments that can help me in that process, and that were very instrumental in the end, helping me get through it. So when it came to seeking diagnosis, it was after after years of taking big L's and failing the degree, crashed my car a couple of times, losing friends, and all this nonsense on the way, just financial difficulties, all these things that kind of seemed very manageable, nothing that was overbearing at the time. I might look at something like, paying off this one payment a month direct debit, that seems easy enough, it's not nothing too challenging, I've got the money to do it. But then you just forget to set something up, or you get a parking ticket that's if you pay it within 2 weeks, it's half the cost. It's fine, I don't want to pay it today, so I pay it tomorrow. Next thing you know, it's 4 years have gone by, and you owe a lot more than you would like to. But these things kind of just pile up, and I'm just it's time to seek diagnosis. What's the process? I think I ended up going to therapy first, because even though I kind of had an idea, again, I didn't really want to believe that I had ADHD, so I went to therapy, got counselling, I spoke to wellbeing advisors, spoke to academic tutors and things like that, who all kind of gave you advice to give to normal people, get a calendar, try, get organised, timetable like this, or do things like that. None of this seemed to work. So I eventually went through, I did an online test. It's type in your results to see, answer a couple of questions, and they also tell you whether or not you're likely to have ADHD. Of which I got a ridiculously high score. It's yeah, you're pretty messed. I'm okay, let me pursue this. Let me see what happens when I pursue this. The process for me, I'm thinking back, it was very much I spoke to someone at the uni, and it's you need to fill out a referral form. So I filled out the form, put my information in, said, this is why I think I have this is why I think I have that, this is why I think I have that. And one of the reasons why it's difficult as an adult is because, again, it doesn't manifest over time. It's something that you've had as a child. So it's hard to prove. Well, for me, it wasn't that bad, because I think I'm 24, sure, but I've been in education this entire time. So it's kind of easier to spot the trends and to see, this is something that I do, this is a tendency that I have, not just something that I'm making up. So it's easier to prove that this is something that's affected you as a child growing up as an adult. Whereas if you're 44 and you haven't been to school in a while, there's no one to prove your stories. It very much becomes he say, she say, yeah, I fidget, it's under the table. You can't see me fidgeting right now, but this leg is shaking. It's not, yeah, it's not for me. But you can understand how that can be, that can create a barrier in terms of proving that you've had this your whole life. So yeah, I filled the form out, loads of information. I submitted it to the uni student health service, and then I don't know if it was a psychiatrist or a educational psychiatrist, or whatever the specific job title is, but they reviewed it and they were asked me a couple of questions on the phone. It's yeah, this sounds like ADHD, so we're going to refer you to Psychiatry UK, who are the leading, well, I don't know if they're leading, but they're a body of psychiatrists who can actually give you the diagnosis. So, that was referred to them I started this process in May, I think I was referred in June, and then I had a call with them in October, who, again, I had to fill out another form, I had to do blood pressure tests and all these different tests, and I had to get a friend to not corroborate my stories by any means, but to give their assessment of, if they thought I was any of these types, does Jordan do this, or, can you give an example of that? They submitted all that information, I submitted my information, And then I spoke to a psychiatrist for like half an hour to an hour. Literally it's a proper grilling process to find out every last detail. The rationale behind it was because it's not just for ADHD. These psychiatrists can review, obviously they're trained, so they understand what like PTSD is, autism, anxiety disorder, ASD is autism, so a bunch of different disorders. They have an understanding of like, what to look for. So the whole point of this process isn't just to give you one diagnosis. I think it's to try and understand your mental and your psyche as a whole, and then give you the correct medication or the correct therapy, the correct procedures, depending on what you have. An example of that, I think, is like dissociation, and ADHD have some similar symptoms. Like dissociation might be like you're daydreaming, or if you're on a bus and you suddenly just show up at your location, it's, oh wow, how did I get here? That can be inattentiveness. ADHD is just like losing attention, looking out the window, whatever, daydreaming. But it can also be, it can also be dissociation. And the meds you get for those two things, I don't actually know what you get for DID, whether the I stands for dissociation individual disorder or something, I don't know. But it's obviously different, and that can lead to bad effects either way. So they have an understanding of all these things. So the whole point of this like stringent process to make sure they actually diagnose you with the right thing. And for me that was between May and October. So 5 months. 5 months it took me to get from the initial referral, your initial like filling out the forms and stuff, to the official diagnosis. One thing to note is that even though it was 5 months, it didn't feel like I did everything here and then waited 5 months. There was like filling out a form, speaking to this person, filling out a form, speaking to that person. So there was a bit of like steps in the way. But it's worth noting that you can skip this process. I don't know how much by, maybe like, I think you probably get diagnosed in like 2 weeks when I checked at the time. Haven't checked it since. But this is if you go through your private route. The only problem with private, and I'm not going to go into it at length because I didn't do it. But you can, the problem is that it's expensive. You have to pay up front for the diagnosis. Well, not for the test. You pay for the referral for the test, and they might just say, no, you don't have it, and money's gone. So you're not paying to be diagnosed. You're paying for the test, and that can be anywhere from like 600 to 1,500. I've seen when I was doing my research at the time, and I'm like, even £600 isn't worth a 12-month wait list for me. Like I'm alright. I'm cool. The initial wait list, was 12 weeks, and I think it's probably 12 months. Sorry. And I think it might even live up to that, because once you get diagnosed, you still have to, you can either get the coaching and mentoring route where they give you access to like tutors or whatever it may be, or alternatively you can go down the medication route where they give you medication. But in the case of ADHD, and this is another point when it comes to private, is that it takes up to 3 months, I think they said, because they give you a dosage, and then every month, every week, whatever, you have to feed back to them, say, I tried it this month, and I felt this way. I tried this month, felt that way, and then they adjust your dosage each time, adjust the concentration. It's called a titration process, where they again titrate and figure out exactly how much of the stimulant drug you need to feel good, to actually for it to work on you, and that can take a long time. But if you're going through the private route, you have to pay for that. You're paying for up to 3 months of them figuring out what you need. And I don't know how much it costs. I didn't bother looking into the specifics. After I saw the £600, I'm like, I'm not doing that. So the drugs don't really matter. But you have to pay for those, the whole titration process. And even then, I think you have to pay for an additional 3 months or something before you can go back to NHS free medication. Or I don't know if it's free, probably it's discounted. But it's a bit of a process, and it adds up to a lot of money. Hence why I didn't do it. And I wouldn't really recommend it unless either you needed it urgently, or if you could just afford it, then that's different as well. But otherwise, obviously go for it as early as possible while you're still in some sort of institution, because that will help a lot. One thing to note actually is, even if you're still on the waiting list, once you've been referred, you have what they call a working diagnosis. So most universities, at least my university, Uni of Bristol, were able to give you, the AEAs, the alternative exam arrangements, or to give you like deadline extensions and stuff, just on the premise that you're getting diagnosed, versus like having to have the official letter diagnosis. The actual letter will keep you, gives you more leverage in terms of like jobs. For the Equalities, Disabilities Act, you need to have proof. If you're going to get, some other reasonable adjustments, you need to prove that you have it. But for most universities, at least from my understanding, and it's definitely true for Bristol, is once you have a working diagnosis, you can, you can flex a little bit. You're not like fully out in the clear yet. You still need to prove it, so you can get access to more like support, or for the DSA, Disabled Students Allowance from Student Finance England. But it's workable. So yeah, that's me, man. That's me. After fortunately, it wasn't 12 months in total. It was only 5 till I got my diagnosis. And then I'm on an 18-week wait list for medication, so that will take me to what, like 9 months basically, an additional 4 months, sorry, to get through to the front of the checklist, of the waiting list. And then it's going to be 3 months of titrating the meds, so before you get onto the proper medication. So that would actually be the full 12 months until I'm like fully in the clear. But well, I say in the clear till I've made that step. But because not everyone goes through the medical route, you basically are, I basically have been diagnosed with ADHD, just haven't got the support yet. So what's things I talked about, obviously the titration list and waiting for medication. There are also like, you can get support through, the universities that for me, we have like a group called Amano who did handle like study skills tuition and like mentoring, coaching and stuff. That's all a bit different. But in terms of the real world, I don't know. Yes, you gotta figure that out on your own. For NHS or whatever the support network may be. There are some great creators out there. I really enjoy listening to the ADHD Adults podcast, I believe it's called. Yeah, I've got it up in front of me somewhere. There's also some Instagram accounts that are pretty good, like ADHD Actually, Mini ADHD Coach, ADHD Couple, which is kind of interesting, ADHD Babes. So there's a lot of, if you just type in ADHD, tons of stuff comes up. These are like Instagrammers. And even from way back, I really enjoyed ADHD, the Joyner Lucas song, ADHD, the Kendrick Lamar song. Like a lot of these artists, the guy's name, I think is Slow Tie. He's got a song about ADHD as well. So a couple of banging hits out there. I'm not gonna lie. But I think for me, the general process is trying to learn more about it, scientifically and socially. Like, I think it's important to recognize that this isn't just a learning disorder. It also does have tangible effects on your relationship building. I really suck at. All my friends will tell you that I'm always late, and it's not even my fault half the time. I'm not. You know what? It's actually never my fault. I'm not gonna lie. These train strikes here in London. What am I supposed to do? Get there early? Like, come on, man. Come on. This is TFL's problem. TFL is like the manifestation of ADHD. So I think, again, socially it's important because it could be small things like, again, being disorganized and missing events and stuff is one thing. But if people are talking to you and you're just like on your phone, you lose attention, or I don't know, if you spontaneously, like something that's quite prominent in ADHD, like I mentioned driving, I think, allegedly, when you're driving, it's like skipping the lunch queue for school, isn't that big a deal. No one's really going to get hurt. There'll be a couple of annoyed kids, but no one's going to get hurt by doing that. But alternatively, if you're driving down and you're trying to come off from this junction, this exit, instead of just sitting in traffic, you can like swerve around, and, trying to jump in front of everyone, the whole process of like skipping a queue becomes a lot more, a lot more life-threatening, a lot more dangerous. The ramifications of that are a bit more significant. And things like that are why I think, whether you understand the science of it or not, whether you care about the, longer exam times or, whatever it may be, the actual process of understanding how your brain works, what are your tendencies more than anything. So it's not just exclusively, I think a bit slower. It's like, no, I'm always going to think a bit slower. It's not just, I'm disorganized. It's like, no, I'm fundamentally, chronically, this is like an actual thing. This is the way my brain processes information or like handles these sorts of things, which goes far beyond academics or work performance. And it becomes way more like, missing a deadline in school it's kind of bad, but it's not it's not the end of the world. Missing an anniversary, suddenly, well, that's even less important. Let's just keep it real. But no, understanding the importance of like why the medication are stimulants when you're already hyperactive, understanding the science behind it, as well as the social and real world ramifications. Those are things that I'm taking on board, and I think I'd recommend most people with ADHD, or even without ADHD, to be fair, people that, whether you have it or not, it's important to understand how people work around you. But yeah, that's all just to say that it's important to recognize that this isn't just a brain thing. It's like literally your everyday. And there's a reason why the Equalities Act and the Disabilities Act and all these things that exist. It's because it's real. There's obviously a conversation about whether neurodiversity counts as like a disability per se. I'm not gonna stand here and say whether it is or isn't. That's for the people to decide. But either way, the fact that it's strikes a chord goes to show that there obviously are some measurable effects. That whether you believe it or not, they do exist. So be conscious of that. But yeah, that's kind of like my next steps in a nutshell. I'm kind of just waiting to see what happens with the meds. Otherwise, I think I've done the learning. There's obviously more to uncover, more to unwrap, more to unlearn. I think a lot of my life so far, there's obviously I've kind of lived with the notion that I didn't have any mental difficulties. Now I appreciate that I do. So I'm starting to think, oh, that's why I do these things. That's why I'm late. Not as an excuse. Obviously, being on time isn't that deep. But if I'm like, okay, I can leave in 10 minutes, and then you blink and it's like, damn it, I'm 5 hours late. I don't feel as bad anymore. Or now I'm just like, I technically can leave in 10 minutes, but let me actually leave now instead of waiting, because I know how this plays out. So being more like conscious of those things for myself I'm hoping helps. I haven't really seen anybody in a minute, so I don't know if that's if that's manifested yet. But yeah, I guess beyond that, going on to the final part of this video and almost like my honest thoughts. The reason why I put this at the end is because I don't expect everyone to make it this far. To be honest, obviously if you're still here, shout out to you lot. But this is more like, I guess more just not like ranting, but it's not particularly relevant for the story. It's more just like, again, my thoughts, and honestly, my honest thoughts. And I don't know, when I first got diagnosed, it was like a relief at first, because I was like, okay, so it's not my fault. It's not all of my fault, at least. There are some like biological, or psychological reasons as to why some of these things happen. These are more like tendencies. It's not like I'm the problematic one. So it was a bit of a relief. But then it was also like, hold on a minute, why did I have to go through hearing all of this and watching this podcast and doing this test and calling that person, doing all this different stuff? I've been in the education system my entire life, basically. And instead of teachers picking me up and saying, you know what, maybe we should get checked for this, or can you explain why you keep doing these things, or trying to understand and trying to help me, they always try and say, oh, this is in your best interest, doing this is in your best interest. But that's not really true now, is it? Looking back at secondary school and sixth form, they put a lot of emphasis on trying to get children into university, and they would always say, under the guise of this is within your best interest, study. I remember saying I wanted to do like maths or physics at university. I actually applied for maths and physics at different unis separately, but my teachers were like, nah, don't do that. Apply for engineering. Engineering's within your best interest. You like cars, right? And like, I guess and they kind of like program you, for lack of better words, into doing things. They coerce you into doing things. I remember at my school it was like, you couldn't go to prom, or unless you had applied to university. And if you weren't going to apply to UCAS, you'd have to at least give them like a presentation, not a literal presentation, but they wanted you to justify and explain why you weren't applying to university, because you have to apply right here, right now, or again, no prom. And it's like, come on, man! I've been at school for like 7 years. My friends, you're telling me that I have to go to university? Like it doesn't even sound like a legal thing now that I'm saying it out loud. And even university, it's like, when you're having issues, there are two approaches. They either say, well, that's your problem, so suspend a year and get out and handle it on your own, or they say, suck it up, here's a study plan and handle it. In my experience, it was very much like, maybe I'll do a refresh like honest thoughts of Bristol video in the future as well, to kind of add more context to things and talk about it in more depth. But it was very much like, at least from the way I experienced it, I don't think this is like a objective blight on Bristol. I don't know how other students feel about things. But you kind of just get signposted around. It's like, if you come up to someone with an issue, they say, oh, that's something for the wellbeing service. Like, okay, cool. So now you go to wellbeing. In that person's head, they've done their job. They said where to go and you went. So that's their job complete. If you don't come back to them and say, this didn't help, then they don't really, there's no follow-ups, there's no care. I'm someone who's had to fail multiple years of like all these extenuating circumstances, EC forms, whatever, all these mental health issues, gone to counselling, done this, done that. And it's never really been followed up on. They've never really drawn attention to it up until this year, and it's like, oh, you're disabled now, now we get it. But even then, this whole process of trying to do it on my own, done all the chasing on my own, which I appreciate. It's all an independent thing. I don't expect my tutor to wake up and do these things for me. But it would have been cool to have someone in my corner. So I kind of feel maybe let down's a bit excessive. But I feel like this could have been handled a lot quicker, a lot easier, and way earlier in the process. If I had the support in place when I needed it, then I wouldn't still be here in this room after 7 years of studying at Bristol to complain and talk about what adulthood ADHD is. So yeah, it's a strange one, but it is what it is. To an extent, I'm kind of impressed. I'm not gonna act like I'm doing super well in life. I'm like clear, I'm the greatest, or nothing like that. I've got no reason to have an ego right now. But I do think it's quite impressive how, despite the setbacks, it's almost like I've been shackled to this like huge ball you know, some generational trauma in there, some, you know, some debt in there, some like mental disorders in there. And for a long time I just didn't know. I was kind of like trying to run with all the rest of you guys, you know, trying to keep up, make it in life, you know, in this whole race that, you know, we refer to life as a race. I'm trying to, like, you know, trying to win, trying to get by. And even though in recent years I've seen my peers kind of, you know, surpass me, I've never really felt out of sight. I've always looked in the distance and said, you know, that's kind of where I gotta go. You know, no one's quite made it yet, there yet. You know, some people are richer than me, some people are a bit happier than me, some people are a bit smarter than me, but no one's all three. You know, no one's richer, happier, and smarter than me. You know, I don't feel like I'm out of the race yet. But now it's like, oh, this is why I'm behind. Well, you know, this is at least contributes to why I'm behind. Maybe I could have been working harder here and there. But it's definitely harder having this huge weight on my shoulders. You know, now I can, whether or not I can just cut it off is different. I don't know how effective meds are going to be, but at least now I know that I've got this and I can handle the rest of the race differently. You know, maybe I'm going to pick it up and carry the weight instead of having it just dragging behind me. Who knows, but it's, you know, it's good to know. Good to know what's going on, at least. I think with that, like, I'm more excited than I am fearful, because it's like, I feel like I've been working at 50% capacity this entire time. If I can, like, double my output suddenly, then it's a wrap. It's a wrap for you lot. Again, that's just pulled a number out of nowhere, so I don't actually know what to expect, but I'm more excited than I'm fearful right now. The only real takeaway, and if I'm being totally honest, to the masses or to the one person who watches this, you know, whoever it may be, to watch this far, is please talk to somebody. You know, whether you have it or you think you have it or you're just curious, like, get it out, because the quicker you can get into this process of either, you know, getting diagnosed yourself or getting your friend to consider diagnosis, or just to understand more about ADHD and, you know, neurodiversity in general. Or just meeting a friend, you know, go to the barista in Starbucks and say, hey, have you heard of ADHD? Like, just, you know, why not? You know, just say Jordan sent you, and then you'll probably be fine. Everyone knows and loves a friend called Jordan, so you're you're pretty safe there. But yeah, just do the talking. I think this whole, like, idea of taboo and, oh, I don't want to talk about it and, oh, it's weird. Like, you know, maybe it's weird to your parents or to a couple of old people or, you know, to a couple of young people. But, you know, there's always someone out there that wants to talk about it, or that's at least open to the conversation. And the quicker we can, you know, build those bridges, the better. You know, the quicker it gets to a world where everyone, or at least the majority, or at least, you know, a community of people are happy to talk about whatever it may be, the better. You know, keeping these things secret or feeling alone, or, you know, coming to YouTube to watch these videos instead of talking to your friends about it, it says a lot about the society that we live in. And it's good that we can do this, but it shouldn't be the only way. So let's, that's I put this whole, like, 4-hour video. That's the only bit of information that I think is actually valuable, and it's coming at the very end, so take that on board. From next week we're going to do some more exciting stuff, less crybaby, emotive, informative stuff. But yeah, shout out to ADHD gang. If you have ADHD too, put that in the comments down below. I want to see you guys, even if you got to do it in a way that your friends don't see. I don't know, let's get out there. As for me, it's now approaching 1 AM upload time. You know, it's technically still Monday, so it's not late yet. But yeah, in a bit.